I'm Associate Professor John Cass from the Marx Institute at Western Sydney University. I lead a HPRNet project entitled Perceptual and Cognitive Optimization of Visual Augmented Reality Displays in Simulated Combat Environments. Quite the mouthful. So subtitled as Stress and Augmented Reality. In this presentation, I'll provide some background, walk you through the experimental design, and bring you up to date in our progress. Visual augmented reality, or AR, refers to the superimposition of virtual computer-generated images into a user's visual field to produce a composite of real-world natural scenes and digitally generated objects. AR is currently being adopted by military forces around the world as a means of training and enhancing situational awareness, by providing wearers with near instantaneous tactical, positional, and communicative feedback. One of the great benefits promised by AR systems is their capacity to present vast amounts of information to the viewer. But this potentially comes at a cost. The human brain, for all its remarkable computational power, is extremely limited in terms of the amount of information that it can meaningfully extract at any given moment. That is to say, it has limited cognitive and perceptual capacities, which are a consequence of neural constraints. Although you might feel that you're aware of everything in your visual field, an abundance of experimental evidence indicates that we're only consciously aware of a fraction of the information presented to our visual fields. Moreover, our visual systems are constrained by strong perceptual limits. For example, visual acuity falls off precipitously in our peripheral vision, which constitutes about 95% of our visual field. Also profound are the effects of clutter. Objects that might be relatively easy to identify when viewed in isolation can be practically impossible to identify when surrounded by a visual clutter of the kind that's common in natural scenes. This project is an exploration of these capacities. To understand how we'll accomplish this, I need to explain in detail our experimental task. This is a bird's eye view of our combat task. The green circle in the center represents the human participant. These pink sectors represent regions within which two virtual agents will appear. One of these agents will be hostile and the other one isn't. We can designate these as enemy and friendly agents, respectively. To the naked eye, it's going to be difficult for the observer to distinguish which of these is the enemy. In practical terms, the main feature distinguishing the two agents is that the enemy will attempt to shoot at the participant. Predictably, it's the participant's task to prevent this from happening by shooting the enemy. On each experimental trial, the location of the enemy and the friendly agent will be randomized. Consequently, prior to any given trial, the participant won't be able to predict on which side the enemy is going to appear. So, how is the participant supposed to know which one is the enemy? On each trial, the enemy's location will first be signified by an AR heads-up display showing one or more gratings. The location of the enemy agent, be it left or right, is indicated by the orientation of the grating. A grating tilted to the left indicates that the enemy will be located to the left. A grating tilted to the right indicates that the enemy will be located to the right. I'd now like you to pay attention to the relative tilt of these two heads-up gratings. Even without reading the text above, you probably experienced little difficulty ascertaining which of these is tilted to the left and which is tilted to the right. I'm now going to make this more complicated by introducing additional elements. Now your task in each case is to decide whether, on average, the gratings as a group or ensemble are tilted to the left or to the right. At the bottom of the slide, you can see two sets of orientation probability distributions. The purple curves, on average, represent orientations tilted to the left. The orange distribution, on average, represents tilts to the right of vertical. Now, on the left, the probability distributions are rather tight and narrower than on the right. This means that the orientations above, the orientations of the elements above, will be more similar to each other than those on the right, which have a broader probability distribution. As you can see, it's more difficult to assess the average tilt of the distributions on the right than it is on the left, even though, on average, all distributions are 5 degrees to the right. The other thing to notice is that the task becomes easier when there are fewer elements to average across. We're interested in establishing how much AR information, that is, how many elements, observers are able to correctly encode to make their judgments. This is sampling efficiency, and it tells us about our capacity to actually integrate information. If a participant manages to integrate only a subset of elements, that is, if their sampling efficiency is poor, their performance on this combat task is also likely to be similarly poor. Here's how it works in the context of our combat task. Here's a third-person view of our participant's avatar, standing within our virtual world. Our human participants will hold a mock rifle whose weight and ergonomics approximate an EF-88 austere rifle. Here's an example of a heads-up display grating indicating that the enemy is located to the left. Here's an example of a more complex heads-up array, consisting in this case of multiple elements, whose average orientation indicates that the enemy is again located to the left. Our second major question is, how susceptible is the brain's AR sampling efficiency to cognitive load? To examine this, we'll employ a well-established cognitively demanding N-back paradigm, in which a stream of auditory letters will be presented to the participant. Participants are instructed to assess whether each letter was the same or was different from the one presented a pre-specified number of events ago, be it 2 events ago or 3 events ago, etc. This cognitively demanding N-back task will then be interrupted by our heads-up informed combat task. Based on the experimental literature, we expect AR sampling efficiency will be degraded as a function of the attentional load induced by this dual task. Another major question addressed by this project relates to the effects of acute stress on AR processing capacity. Acute stressors are known to disrupt our ability to perform various types of cognitive tasks. Far from being pathological, acute stress events bias cognition and perception in order to enable the organism to filter out irrelevant, non-stressful information so that it can deal with the most salient stressful event. In the modern world, however, as in the case of driving a car with screaming kids in the back or in combat situations, this stress-induced cognitive inhibition can be highly maladaptive and may in fact cause combatants to miss critical situational information which might otherwise be delivered via the AR. We ask whether the presence of acute stress mitigates our ability to actually process AR information. We'll be delivering acute stresses via electric shock delivered under various conditions that will either be linked or unrelated to performance in our simulated combat task. In terms of our product and what this project will achieve for defense, we'll be producing an AR delivery system that, 1, is optimized to the perceptual and cognitive demands of a given task and environment, and 2, adapts dynamically to the physiological indices of cognitive load and stress as informed by eye behavior such as pupil dilation and frontal cortical responses as measured by FNIRS. Finally, to summarize our progress so far, we're happy to report that our university ethics has been approved. We've completed a scoping review looking at the relationship between AR, cognitive and perceptual load and stress. A PhD student has started, And importantly, our integrated battlefield task with Headsup display has been created in VR. We'll start collecting data in January. We're on track to begin building stage 2 of our setup, which involves using a combination of HoloLens 2 to present our heads-up information, integrated with our battlefield task, which will be presented within a virtual cave. This, in combination with the measurement of our physiological data, is on track to be completed in 2021. Thank you.